someone gets up and says something terrible about Israel, terrible, that without a very big stick, perhaps, in terms of funding, that, anyone's really going to do much about it on campus.
Stepped into the building, changes swinging on my neck, gold rings on my fingers, summon on my wrist, tucked into my waist, see me with a clip.
That's Arnold Bloch-Leibler partner and now former Zionist Federation of Australia, or ZFA, President Philip Chester, making the case, or to be fair to him in that specific clip, inquiring about the case.
The idea, for example, of taking funding away from institutions or universities that everybody's going to get very excited about.
For exactly the kind of big stick, anti-Semitism envoy Gillian Siegel argues, in her proposed national anti-Semitism strategy, that she or someone like her needs, even as we are assured that no one would ever actually use it.
I don't think it'll ever get to that point.
The objective here is that you don't end up in that world.
I think really it's our job to fight for that.
We disagree. Dismissal is always easier than discourse.
May not like what was going to be said either, but they have a right to say it, right? So, and don't use the law this way.
That's Kenneth Stern, the author of the so-called IRA definition, which we discussed in another video, arguing that its use in America, and now Australia, is counter to its original intent.
What I'm concerned about is that when you go down this road, you really actually do a disservice to the university, you do a disservice to Jewish students.
But it's only discourse that can bring people together and change what people believe.
I think it's about time that we just cracked down on this and said, look, enough.
That never works. If we want more cohesion in this country, we need more and better discourse. Unfortunately,
the discourse of anti-Semitism has been completely perverted by the need to find a way of delegitimizing and censoring people who are critical of Israel or even critical of Zionism, because you don't have good arguments.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying.
That's Peter Beinart, professor, journalist, scholar, and critic of modern Judaism and Zionism. He's a highly influential and polarizing figure inside the Jewish American community, making a critique of anti-Semitism discourse which turns out to have been validated by his ideological opposite.
Our job is not to make you look good, American Jews. Your job is to make us look good.
Harvard emeritus professor Ruth Weiss, who is equally polarizing and influential. She's not only emeritus professor at Harvard, where she held an endowed chair, she is also a National Humanities Medalist, an honor which puts her in the company of the most important pillars of American culture and society. There's only one such medal awarded every year. Even in Australia, a search on her name on the ABC's website garnered 88 hits.
Don't let the war of words ever be fought about Israel's nature. Let it be fought about why you can't accept Israel.
The Anti-Defamation League knows that if it's trying to defend the military court system in the West Bank, they've already lost.
What's worse, there are those who contend that the kind of motivated reasoning and instrumentalized rhetoric advocated by people like Professor Weiss is an invitation to, if not a slippery slope toward, mendacity.
They don't care about whether it's true or not.
That's political scientist and Professor Norman Finkelstein, who, as you probably guess, is also highly influential and highly polarizing, inside and outside the Jewish community, in America and around the world.
Because if it serves the cause, it's true.
And to be clear, nothing that Professor Weiss says in the video we share, nor in anything we know she has ever said or written, is an encouragement to mendacity.
Any discussion of what life is actually like for Palestinians on the ground, you've already lost the conversation.
Turn the subject to the accusers, not to the accused.
So the move is always to basically to turn attention away from what's actually happening to Palestinians on the ground and turn it into a question about the motivations of the person who is making the criticism.
Teach them how to defend by attacking.
Mr. Finkelstein's contention, however, is that the ideological fervor, which is so obvious in clips like these, leads many people to that.
I know that mentality.
You have to know that that's the goal. You have to expose these people. You cannot allow them into a big tent.
If it serves the cause, even if it's not true, it's true.
Well, first of all, Professor, thank you for these words of wisdom, which 30 years ago would sound mainstream, but nowadays it's a bravery to say them.
Back to Australia. This is the most important consequence of what Ida Buttrose, David Anderson, and the entire ABC board did to Antoinette Latoupe. It's not just the injustice of their treatment of one Australian woman, as awful as that was. It's not even the fact that this has had a chilling effect on the ABC's reporting. It's that Australians, just like Americans, have moved on. We're not watching the ABC when we look for information about Gaza or anti-Semitism or the protests. That means the ABC isn't in place to host the kinds of conversations we Australians are going to have. The conversations we said New Yorkers are at least addressing. I'm not saying the Mamdani set have got this figured out. Far from it. But at least they are talking in places like the 92nd Street Y, where conversations in an auditorium full of Jewish New Yorkers are taking place that would be absolutely impermissible in a place like the ABC. They're taking place in bookstores and public lectures, campus protests, and, you might be surprised to hear this, synagogues. When are we going to have these conversations? And who's going to host them? If they're too hot for the ABC, too hot for the classroom, too hot for public gatherings like writers' festivals.
All the horrific actions of Louise Adler in inviting overtly anti-Semitic speakers to appear at that festival.
Too hot for the Wheeler Center, which at the time of filming had only 2 events on the subject of the war in Gaza, and not until 2025, despite weekly protests just up the road. Too hot for the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra.
In August this year, the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra cancelled my performance after I dedicated a piece to journalists in Gaza and provided factual context about their deaths.
If it's too hot for all the spaces where we expect to have civilized conversations, then where shall we have them? When the ICJ issued its controversial arrest warrant for Israel's prime minister, this was the level of analysis in our media.
Put them on the same page as if there is some equivalence there. Creating a moral
impression of equivalence.
Hamas and Israel in the same category.
A sense of equivalence there.
A really obscene moral equivalence.
Looks like everyone at News Corp got the memo. What about the ABC?
Put them on a level playing field.
I guess the memo got to the ABC as well.
Sinwar and Netanyahu being put on the same platform for an arrest.
But on the question of equivalence on the basis of the announcement being at the same time.
Or was that just the impact of Miss Latouf's firing?
I spin fellas, my swing quicker than Federer. I serve packing a bass bag on a regular. And I'ma tell her how she sing for me, T-Pain, your mama's.
When we drive discussion of important matters out of legitimate public spaces, those conversations often happen anyway. As the ABC saga demonstrates, when it comes to reporting on Gaza, Australians have been living in the intellectual equivalent of a food desert. At the ABC, we worry that the problem isn't just a few executives, the imperious Ms. Buttrose and unfortunate Mr. Anderson. The problem at the ABC seems to be a cultural disconnect between what they do and what Australia needs from them. As ABC Chair Kim Williams' address at the press club highlighted for many.
I have a question about Joe Rogan. He's obviously the world's most popular podcast host. He has 3 billion listeners. He's sort of managed to successfully capture that bro market in America. So I'm just wondering if you had any observations about what's behind the Joe Rogan effect, how you believe he's managed to so successfully capture this huge market. And then for us here in Australia, you know, how would or should the ABC be going about capturing that kind of audience?
Look, I'm not sure that I'm the right person to respond to that question. I am not a consumer or enthusiast about Mr. Rogan and his work.
Okay, next question.
I am not one of the 3 billion, and I'm unlikely to be 3 billion and one anytime soon.
Again, okay, perhaps you might have someone brief you.
These things are always like Pierce Morgan-y, which is fine, you know, where everyone's screaming over each other and, you know, there's 5 different people talking over each other. There's never just rational conversations where you discuss things, and I respect both of you. I think both of you are brilliant.
I think people like Mr. Rogan prey on people's vulnerabilities. They prey on fear.
That's a strong statement to make about somebody one doesn't know anything about.
And I thought, I bet you agree on a lot of things, and I bet you disagree on a lot of things, and it'd be fascinating to see your perspectives on these things. So that's why you're here together.
They prey on anxiety. They prey on all of the the elements that contribute to uncertainty in society.
You wake up to realizing that so much of the stuff you believed was bullshit propaganda and is all lies.
Yeah, bitch, I said what I said.
People I talked to who told me that these things weren't true are now telling me that they are. And that definitely undermined a narrative that I had.
And they entrepreneur fantasy outcomes and conspiracy outcomes.
It's hard to explain to people who aren't Israeli what the attitude towards the rest of the world is.
This is a real danger when the establishment and the institutions are all caught with their pants down, having sold a bunch of very consequential policies based on lies.
As being a normal part of social narrative.
And then once people realize that, they go, well, what else have they been lying to me about?
It shows the kind of blind spot that we had. And now I'm going to have to rethink a lot of things.
I personally find it deeply repulsive.
There's danger in that, and I think that there are some things that then people jump to conclusions that are
the legacy of anti-Semitism, and it's not that viewpoint is not completely, it doesn't have any validity to it.
I'm also absolutely in dismay that this can be a source of public entertainment when it's really treating the public as plunder for purposes that are really quite malevolent.
Well, then maybe the people with power should do a better job of not lying through their teeth about everything.
Well, I'm wondering how the sacking of Antoinette Lattouf accords with those responsibilities.
Interesting question. Miss Lattouf was not dismissed. Miss Lattouf was on Miss Lattouf had a 5-day contract.
Okay, but this is semantics.
No, we're asked constantly to report without fear or favour, and the one thing we expect in return is to have our backs covered.
Do you want to address the premise of the question, which is how does this affect the ABC's capacity to hold up its statutory obligations?
I think the ABC has a long history of being compliant with its statutory obligations under a whole welter of public policy obligations. I think the ABC is a very strong respondent to the Parliament.
All it took for the organisation to abandon its most basic obligations to one of its on-air presenters was a 3-day email campaign and a single inquiry from the Australian newspaper.
It is a compliant body under the PGPA and is very aware of its responsibilities under the Public Governance and Public Accountability Act.
You'd forgive the thousands of other ABC staffers across the country for looking over their shoulder from here on in.
The ABC becomes so pusillanimous that you're seriously suggesting that we shouldn't be free to speak the truth in Australia?
It is an organisation which has an impeccable record in audit.
Or are we going to muzzle ourselves? Is that the depths you've sunk to?
You guys have to have the biggest pussies of all time in the media here. Go ahead, what's the question?
The question is...
Do you think that the leadership of the ABC over the past few years actually understand journalism?
That's why you're here. I'm genuinely interested in your views as well, even though you completely disagree with him. The marketplace of ideas in real time.
And in that marketplace of ideas, the idea that it is anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, to want to boycott Israel, to consider Israel a racist endeavor, or even to say that it should not exist, at least in its current form, the idea that any of those things are anti-Semitic is not landing. It's not passing the pub test.
And I'll never forget the total confusion I felt when those pro-Palestinian marches with tens of thousands of people took place around the world right after October 7. I still don't understand it.
No, she doesn't. Which is why Australians seeking insight should probably look someplace else.
Did you ever think you would see that here in Australia? No, I was quite shocked. Quite shocked.
Firstly, deeply shocked.
Astonished and outraged.
Maybe even more widely than that. Because there are many Australians who have not been shocked, either by what happened in Israel these past few years, or by what's happening here in Australia. We've heard from them in prior videos, and we'll hear from them again in this one.
We're not getting pushed around anymore. We're now seeing consequences levied against those who take action and stand against our people.
Nobody should be pushed around. Are Jews in Australia any safer today because of the kinds of actions men like Mr. Rivkin encouraged.
There needs to be a price to be paid for being an anti-Semite.
As we've said, we believe in the free market of ideas, and that Mr. Rivkin has the same right to criticize and even denounce his fellow Australians that Australians have to criticize or denounce the government or state of Israel, so long as it's done lawfully and ideally also respectfully and honestly.
If you're the partner of a law firm and you see an applicant has engaged in this sort of conduct, don't employ them.
If by these sorts of conduct he means making statements or protests critical of Israel, we'd advise you to speak to your employment lawyer before putting any of this advice into practice at your company.
In the last 5 years, elevated anti-Semitic attitudes have more than doubled their share of the U.S. population.
Just as in our parable of the empire and the plague in the last video. The cure self-evidently is not working. It's increasingly evident to everyone, Jew and non-Jews alike, that the holy men in this plague don't have a clue about what is really driving the disease.
Now, globally, that percentage went from 26% to 46%. 2.2 billion adults and change.
And yet, no one in Mr. Greenblatt's universe has ever posed the question, maybe we're missing something fundamental.
That was the 5th time in the last 6 years that we've broken a new record. And if I look back over the 10 years since I became ADL CEO, the number's up 10x where it was when I started on the job.
A job for which Mr. Greenblatt is paid $1.2 million per year to continue doggedly pursuing without ever questioning his fundamental assumptions about the world. How about over the course of his life? In a recent podcast interview with the New York Times, Lulu Garcia Navarro asked Greenblatt about growing up in 1980s America.
Can you just tell me a little bit about your experience as a young Jewish person there?
Anti-Semitism, I experienced some of it. I had comments made to me in high school by people who I didn't like, and sometimes even friends might say something like, "Oh, you really Jewed me down."
That's awful, and nobody should have to experience that in a tolerant society. However, I bet he never imagined that 4 decades later, after 10 years at the helm of the ADL,
the single greatest threat to freedom of speech is Israel and its supporters here in the United States.
We can deport them, we can put them in jail, we can make their lives miserable, we can cut off their funding.
The history of this era will say that Jewish people were the sledgehammer for fascism.
That's the global best practice some Australians want to replicate here.
The majority of Gen Z have an unfavorable impression of Israel.
Do you ever worry that you might have positioned the ADL in such a way that the younger generation of Jews won't see you as defending them and the things that they believe in?
And my friends, I think the reason for that is that we're losing the digital war.
Their understanding is limited to proximate drivers, not fundamental ones.
The Al Jazeera effect.
For every one hashtag that's pro-Israel, there are 54 times pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian hashtags.
Okay, they're getting their information from TikTok and whatever it is.
They're seeing just a distorted amount of content that is really presenting the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian narrative.
We're losing that war. When you think about it, the masters of the universe are Jews.
That's filmmaker Wendy Sachs and former Congressman Norm Coleman, who clearly doesn't realize what a terrible track record leaders have when they promise their people that they are masters of anything.
And it's just not authentic.
Well, there's nothing more important than authenticity, which is why we're so excited about reports of the $150 million social media influencing fund that Israel has announced, which we understand is responsible for compelling, authentic, and persuasive content like this.
If I were Israel, I wouldn't even provide matching socks to Gaza. But here's all the aid that y'all claim doesn't exist. Now walk with me.
Went to Israel. I spent 2 weeks there with the church, and we had an incredible time.
And it's just not authentic.
I'm here in Gaza, and all I see is food, water, and opportunity. But instead of Hamas distributing the ramen noodles, they're eating it all, and that's why their leaders are on Ozempic.
We had only one incident where a small child spit on one of the pastors.
And it's just not authentic.
It's us. And we have to figure out a way to win the digital battle.
Imagine supporting people who start wars just to lose the wars so they can cry about it and then try it all again.
You must see anti-Semites are literally obsessed with Jews. Now walk with me.
Amelia, we got to get our digital sneakers on.
If you're losing the digital war on Instagram, which is owned by Meta, employs who knows how many veterans of the IDF, and where entire teams from Unit 8200 have reportedly been seconded, the problem isn't digital, and it's not technology.
Young Jews who might self-describe as anti-Zionist or have problems with the state of Israel at the moment, you think that they should...
Come on.
No, but...
While you must see anti-Semites are stacking eviction notices, Jews are out here stacking up businesses.
Jews control all the industries. Maybe if you spent more time taking notes from successful people, you wouldn't have to spend your nights and weekends spreading hate.
As an organization that helps define anti-Semitism and has defined it as anti-Zionism, at a moment when these things are being debated...
Yeah, bitch, I said what I said.
That's one of the most high-profile CEOs in America, rolling his eyes like a teenager at a question about that which many people consider his organization's most fundamental, if not existential, strategic dilemma.
I think Zionism will be looked upon by Jewish history as one of the greatest disasters in Jewish history.
We need to change discourse because we have so many serious things to talk about as a nation, and we are so far from even having the kind of shared language and vocabulary on which we'll have to agree. Let's start with just one word, incredibly emotive, heavily loaded, but which, by the end of this video, you will realize is the least of our problems. Let's talk about what it means to call oneself a Zionist.
It's a powerful ideology, and it's an antidote to this sense of perennial and millennial Jewish suffering. It's hard to give it up because it's a kind of protection against a lot of humiliation and shame.
It's a word that ordinary Australians have much more definite ideas about, now that we all know much more about what the Nakba looked like.
That whole thing where kicking people out of Palestine is such an inconvenient story. They do not like talking about what happened in 1948.
And also about that which we may someday call the second Nakba.
We must firmly push back on those who seek to misrepresent the term Zionism.
Before we do that, Mr. Frydenberg, we probably need to push back on those who seek to misrepresent the term. You see, language is what we call an intersubjective construct. There's no such thing as the objective meaning of words. Meaning depends on context, on what others think it means. More importantly, it depends on what we think other people think it means. Actually, it's even more complex than that. Like share prices, it really depends on what we think other people think it means.
Hey, can I ask you something?
What?
What's forget about it? What is that?
Forget about it. It's like, if you agree with someone, you know, like Raquel Welch's one great piece of forget about it. But then, if you disagree, like a Lincoln is better than a Cadillac, forget about it.
That now iconic scene from Donnie Brasco was funny because it's what intersubjectivity looks like.
You know? But then, it's also like if something is the greatest thing in the world, like Mingitos peppers, forget about it, you know? But it's also like saying go to hell, too. Like, you know, like, hey, Paulie, you got a 1-inch. Paulie says, forget about it.
Forget about it. Paulie, forget about it.
Even for trivial words like forget about it. Now imagine someone pulling out a dictionary and trying to correct them. Because language is intersubjective, nobody can proclaim this is what some word really means. They can only ever say what it means to them and to their community. Obviously, in many cases, that's enough. If a Chinese speaker says to you, this is what this Chinese word means to me, that's enough. There's no reason for a non-Chinese speaker to worry about anyone else. But sometimes we come across words that have different meanings to different groups of people, and in those cases, nobody gets to pull rank. Which means that to arrive at a new intersubjective consensus, we're going to have some discussion and some debates.
Zionism is, simply put, the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their ancient homeland. That's what it is.
That's the look I imagine a woman would give if, upon learning that her husband has been having multiple extramarital affairs for years, hears him say to her, looking straight into her eyes, "Baby, you know I love you. Love you so much." But infidelity is,
simply put,
when a man has so much love to give.
That's what it is.
She call me Mr. Bombastic, friendly fantastic. Touch me on me back, she says I'm Mr. Rowe.
Because there's obviously more to it than that for most people, and Greenblatt knows it.
Zionism is essential to the Jewish tradition.
As non-Jews, we can't comment, other than to say we know plenty of Jewish people who contest that point and sound to us like they know what they're talking about.
The idea of Jews returning to Israel, we've been talking about it since Moses, literally.
Now that is something we can talk about. Because while we have no idea what Jews have been talking about since Moses, literally, and suspect neither does Greenblatt, as we covered in the last video, for almost 2,000 years, there were probably more Jewish people living in Alexandria and then Fushtat than in Jerusalem, if not all of Judea. And at no time was there a movement to return home, despite Egypt and Israel-Palestine being part of the same state until the founding of Israel. So while Jerusalem obviously has an important part in Jewish tradition, as Mecca does for Muslims, Rome for Catholics, and Athens and Constantinople and Alexandria does for Greeks, while all that is no doubt true, this idea of an ancient Jewish urge to return, like salmon, to their ancestral spawning grounds is pure modern mythology. So something happened in the late 19th century, and then really picked up after 1917, to cause the least melanated of all Jews in the world, the ones, in other words, least suited to return to Israel, to suddenly discover this supposed ancient urge, which was unknown even to the Jews of Egypt and Baghdad. What was it that happened around then? We'll never know. It's one of those mysteries of history.
Political Zionism is newer, 125 years, but that notion of self-determination in the homeland.
This use of the term self-determination is an example of what linguists call a neoseme, Greek for new meaning. Zionist discourse is loaded with neosemes, which is fine, as we said. Word meaning is intersubjective, so it can be changed. Let's just be clear, however, that this is what we want to do. Self-determination, used in the context of decolonization, has always referred to the rights of people vis-a-vis some foreign, often overseas, empire which ruled them. There is no other context in which it referred to the rights of some diaspora to congregate in a new land and exercise rights vis-a-vis the people already there. That's a completely new idea. Imagine a Hindu version of the Balfour Declaration, for example. If the Indian government were to ethnically cleanse Kashmir, for example, and invite the world's Roma to migrate there, we might call that all sorts of names, but we would not call it self-determination.
Doesn't exclude Palestinians, doesn't exclude any other group.
Doesn't exclude other groups, just as Balfour promised.
It's saying Jews have the right, this sort of liberation movement, to go back to where they're from.
Let's get serious for a moment. We at Neosis are not here to say that Zionism is this thing or that thing. We don't believe in making blanket statements about people. But Zionists, Muslims, Palestine supporters, or other critics, we know many decent people who call themselves Zionists, who despise the mistreatment of Palestinians, who are as horrified by this war as anyone else, and who fervently believe that there is a reconcilable solution that accommodates their Zionism and the rights of other people. Josh Burns, the Jewish MP from McNamara, spoke for many we know when his office was vandalized, and instead of engaging in spurious allegations about who was responsible or trying to spin it into a political attack, said this:
If I could do anything to stop this conflict from happening any longer, I would do it. But we can't do that in Australia. We just don't have that sort of leverage. What happened outside my office didn't bring about peace in the Middle East. I wish if it did, I would have vandalized my own office, of course, but it didn't. It just vandalized an office here in Australia and caused distress.
That's the kind of voice that is unfortunately too rare in Australia among our political elite, who have trouble thinking beyond the narrow point of view of faction and tribe. Being a leader in multicultural Australia means, at a start, recognizing that each of us is an authority on what words mean to us and nobody else.
The label Zionist, used not in any way accurately.
That's Mark Dreyfus, not talking about what Zionism means to him, but what he is prepared to claim means to some unnamed critics.
I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Zionism. I know something about the subject.
I'm a Zionist, but in the actual sense.
If you have enough money in your pocket to buy a one-way ticket to Israel and you don't, then you're not a Zionist.
Okay, Finkelstein is just being provocative there. What I found so fascinating in Mr. Dreyfus's address is that despite waxing lyrical about what he thinks the word Zionism means to, for example, the Greens, he didn't dare add any detail to what it meant to him.
I'm a Zionist, but in the actual sense.
That's as far as he went, speaking to a Jewish audience at the Bondi Pavilion last October.
Hear calls in which they say they don't want Jews on campus or they don't want Zionists on campus. There's a lot of Jews who feel that Zionism is inextricably combined with their identities. And so a lot of times people feel that those calls in and of themselves don't welcome conversation.
That was a freshman at Columbia, now a sophomore, Parker DeDecker, in what was one of the better stories about the protest movement, featuring a very civilized discussion between Parker, who is a self-described Zionist and critic of the protest movement, and a Palestinian graduate student and protester. We need more conversations like that one. And yes, that does go both ways. We don't support calling people Nazis or racist just because they identify as Zionist, any more than we support calling people anti-Semites because they wear a keffiyeh, or for that matter, wave a Hezbollah flag. Next time you see or hear someone identify with something you think is offensive, instead of flinging adjectives to describe them, start by simply asking them, what does that word mean to you?
Because the biggest advocacy tool that we have is Jewish students who feel comfortable and proud to share what Zionism means to them, what Israel means to them, and what Judaism means to them on campus.
As we said in the previous section of this video, we support women like Alyssa Foster in advocating for this.
Hey, I'm Jewish. This is why that comment's offensive.
We're just here to remind everyone that Jewish students can't do that unless it's in the context of a conversation. Genuine conversation. Two-way conversation. That means being prepared to explain what Zionism means to you, but it also means being prepared to listen and to hear what Zionism means to someone else and how it has impacted them. Most importantly, it means forgetting about coming to the idea of that conversation with a very big stick. Forget about that. Leave it at the door. It's going to harm all students, but Zionist students most of all, because non-Zionist students don't need this conversation. They are discussing Zionism amongst themselves and are converging on their own intersubjective meaning of the word.
Zionism is an ideology of Jewish supremacism. That's what it is. It says it justifies the idea that Jewish people in Israel should have different rights, should have more rights, should reign supreme.
Undemocratic Israel based on an ideology of Jewish supremacy.
As we said in a prior segment, we are not here to endorse any particular meaning of that term. We are simply pointing out that this is the debate with which one can either engage or not engage. But what our friends at the ZFA or ECAJ or any other organization cannot do is silence that debate, no matter what very big stick they bring to the discussion.
It is a Jewish supremacist ideology.
If you disagree with that, if you think that's wrong, you're going to have to explain why it's wrong. Simply calling someone racist and waving very big stick isn't going to cut it. No matter how many pliant politicians smile at you, pander to you, and welcome your support while quietly watching the ground shift underneath all our feet.
Zionism and classical liberal values cannot coexist.
And you're also going to have to explain why it's wrong in the context of Zionism as we see it practiced for almost 80 years. It's not going to be enough to just recite talking points.
It's like being, say, a communist in the 1950s and saying, no, the Soviet Union is not really communism. They misunderstood it.
Or even as late as the 1980s, where people as old as me can still remember gray-haired ex-hippies, often university professors at some liberal arts college, who would say things like, "True communism has never been tried." If you're my age, you remember that. By the 1980s, it actually became a meme. Because while it was true that Marx and Engels never advocated for gulags or totalitarianism or terror, by then, the system had been around long enough and had become impactful enough to enough people that even communists decided that communism was what communism did, not what communist texts promised.
The tension between Zionist values and liberal values of equality.
In any case, that's the debate the next generation is going to have, whether we like it or not. And to anyone from the ZFA who might be watching, it doesn't matter how many journalists like Maria Kostakidis you take to court. The sooner we stop this nonsense, the sooner we can start preparing to have this conversation with each other as Australians. As we said in our first video, we're going to need a better discourse. More frank, more honest, and more genuine. And to those leaders who are not up to the task, we're going to have to say, thank you for your service, but it's time for new voices.
those two sentiments are morphing into each other. Anti-Israel is really anti-Jewish because they want Israel to disappear.
Dismissive statements like that, used to describe people with which we suspect Ms. Siegel has never once in her life had an authentic conversation, just won't cut it anymore. Like the story of Paul Bremer from our first video, it's hard to make good decisions when ensconced inside one's bubble. But it's absolutely impossible when one doesn't even realize how important the world is outside it. An anti-racism envoy who lacks the curiosity and open-mindedness to actually engage with the people she is convinced are anti-Semites is not going to bring us together.
And yet somehow people use that to rationalize and justify actions against American Jews here.
I don't know that any rational person is supporting Jews being treated badly in America.
The discourse of anti-Semitism has been completely perverted by the need to find a way of delegitimizing and censoring people who are critical of Israel or even critical of Zionism, because you don't have good argument.
The way in which these people, these critics use that word, they actually mean Jew. They're not really saying Zionist.
The Anti-Defamation League knows that if it's trying to defend the military court system in the West Bank, it's already lost.
Don't let the war of words ever be fought about Israel's nature. Let it be fought about why you can't accept Israel.
If someone gets up and says something terrible about Israel, terrible.
Any discussion of what life is actually like for Palestinians on the ground, you've already lost the conversation.
That without a very big stick, anyone's really going to do much about it on campus.
So the move is always to basically to turn attention away from what's actually happening.
Teach them how to defend by attacking.
And turn it into a question about the motivations of the person.
They're saying Jew because they know that they cannot say Jew, so they say Zionist.
Can you imagine being a sitting Attorney General of Australia and making such a blanket generalization about millions of Australians? We aren't lawyers, but that sounds to us like it's uncomfortably close to
vilification of a particular group, stopping short of an encouragement to violence,
which the ECAJ has pushed to include among the hate crimes warranting minimum sentencing. Curiosity and dialogue are so important because we have so many other words whose meaning we still need to negotiate. Here's a word that's worth talking about, a word that is absolutely apropos at this moment.
Say one word, pogrom. I mean, Nasser, I don't know if you know what that word means. You accused the Jews there of engaging in a pogrom.
Nasser, it's a very specific word. Yeah. You did use it.
He did, and he used it correctly. Absolutely correctly. So we're pretty sure Nasser Mashni knows what it means. But does Mr. Liebler know what it means? Really know what it means? Beyond just the sense in which Jewish people use that term. You see, pogrom is a Russian word meaning catastrophic destruction. Catastrophic. Catastrophe. That's a Greek word, whose meaning and associations Ms. Karvelas, like any Greek Australian, knows quite well is burned in Greek historical memory. Do you know what the Arab word for catastrophe is? Nakba. Yes, the same word, more or less, and the same meaning. Remember that next time you're tempted to play the cultural appropriation game with words. That for me was a moment of zen in this Q&A episode. 3 successful second-generation Australians, all children of people who came to Australia escaping one kind of catastrophe or another, arguing amongst themselves about who gets to use the word Nakba, pogrom, catastrophe. It's crazy when you think about it. The most notorious pogrom of the 20th century before the Shoah took place in the Russian, now Moldovan town of Kishinev in 1903. It was triggered by the murder of a Christian boy named Mikhail Rybachenko, which was blamed on local Jews and degenerated into a national mania thanks in part to the febrile race baiting of a man named Pavel Khrushchevan, the racist publisher of a local newspaper and allegedly the author of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. He had reporters comb for all the evidence they could find to blame Jews, which, no matter how tenuous, was breathlessly reported with all the innuendo, embellishment, and suggestion that many viewers of cable news would recognize today.
Right now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people.
some really disturbing displays at the Oscars this year. We had Jewish director Jonathan Glazer use his acceptance speech to essentially renounce his Judaism.
Sound familiar? Tension built up day after day through February and March 1903 until Easter Sunday, when something snapped and triggered a 3-day orgy of destruction that left 49 people dead, 700 homes and buildings destroyed, and shocked the world. There are few things that more reliably hijack the amygdala of our tribal Homo sapien brains than reports about harm to children. In fact, it turns out that we can reliably say that there is only one thing that does so more frequently and reliably: the violation of our women. We know this because back in 1895, the pioneering journalist Ida B. Wells looked at the history of almost 1,000 lynchings. Lynchings being what African Americans call pogroms, over a 3-year period to identify patterns, one of the earliest examples of data science in journalism. What she found was that the number one driver was an allegation of rape, with the second being an allegation of harm to children.
Acts of brutality like this. They cut head of children.
Others and children, and yes, they cut off heads. They cut off heads.
Israeli Prime Minister's spokesman just confirmed babies and toddlers were found with their heads decapitated.
Stomach-turning reports of babies being killed.
Babies and adults decapitated.
In many cases, a cofactor was some newspaper feeding the emotional frenzy. It's important to point out that in Ms. Wells' database of lynchings, it's impossible to know how many of the underlying allegations were true and how many were false. Per definition, since none of them ever went to trial, we'll never know. But it doesn't matter. When a mob storms a jail and hangs a suspect, that's a lynching, whether or not the suspect was guilty. And if they go on to ransack his home or neighborhood and kill other people associated with him, I think we'd all agree that's a pogrom. The most notorious anti-black pogrom in the last century took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, where 300 people were killed, 6 times the number of Kishinev.
That could have been the end of the story had it not been for the intervention of the Tulsa Tribune, the daily afternoon newspaper.
Over, you guessed it, the alleged assault of a white woman.
The Tribune published a story the next day entitled "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator."
The story was very incendiary. It used all kinds of buzzwords and menacing images that invoked this notion of a black man assaulting a white woman.
We don't use the word pogrom to describe Tulsa, but again, we suggest that's a perfectly appropriate word.
They know that a black person is about to be murdered by a lynching in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they are not going to let that happen.
The crowd has grown to nearly 2,000, if not more.
And as with the case in many pogroms, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, we'll never know if the alleged perpetrator was guilty or not.
And then, in the words of the sheriff, all hell broke loose.
And the worst single incident of racial violence in American history begins.
Just as we'll never know who actually killed Michael Rybachenko. But it doesn't matter. In all those cases, the essential ingredients were the same: an unproven allegation, the kind that hijacks our Homo sapien amygdala, spread like wildfire, driving people to seek justice on those they believed were guilty of the most heinous crimes against their community.
You better believe that I hate the people that took this girl and raped her brutally. You better believe it. And it's more than anger, it's hatred. And I want society to hate.
5 youths were arrested at 96th Street, all between 14 and 15 years.
These young men were guilty. It was almost unquestioned.
This is the ultimate siren that says none of us is safe.
In 1989, the murder of a jogger in Central Park drove a national hysteria in the U.S. about supposed gangs of grown-up crack babies wilding in city streets. Hillary Clinton coined a term for them: super predators.
They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
Americans my age remember very well how terrifying the idea seemed.
Something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
Turns out, wilding super predators did not exist. Yes, there was crime, and much of it was horrific. But the criminals were just criminals, each one a human being with their own story. The idea of super predators hunting ordinary citizens like alien was just fantasy. And we Americans inflicted enormous unnecessary trauma on entire communities hunting for them.
They seized on the fears of the people, wilding the bestial characterization of the black man.
We walked away from our crime.
I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children.
Back to Kishinev. The unproven allegation that hijacked the amygdalas of thousands of Russians has a name: blood libel.
We, as a Jewish community, know the history of the blood libel. We can identify it. But a lot of people have never engaged with our community, have no idea where that comes from and can't identify it. So for us, if there is a picture, this was a couple of years ago, there was a couple of posters plastered on campus that had Bibi Netanyahu, blood all over his face, holding a Palestinian baby, saying Bibi Netanyahu drinks Palestinian blood.
Your history textbook might tell you that blood libel is the medieval superstition that Jews kill Christian babies and use the blood to enrich the flour that becomes matzo, the absurdity of which would have been obvious to any European who knew anything about Jewish tradition. Because unlike Europeans, Jews don't enrich grains with blood protein. It's not kosher, something we Gentiles have always done, which is why the blood libel made sense to our medieval Christian ancestors. That's how we Gentiles get delicious foods like blutwurst, black pudding, and boudin noir, which you will never find if you've ever thought to ask at your local Jewish deli. But because Rybachenko's body was found during Passover, and most Russians just didn't know this, and were already primed to believe terrible things about Jews, the blood libel spread. And this is why it's good to talk about history in terms like these.
It's not about whatever everyone thinks of Bibi Netanyahu, but it's, if you're a Jewish student walking past that hits our whole story and our whole history as a people.
Because while we obviously understand why said cartoon might be confronting or even distasteful to many people, it's worth remembering that this is how the Australian portrayed Adam Bant. Adam Bant, holding a bucket of blood, standing over a wheelbarrow of blood. And this isn't some college flyer. It's the national broadsheet, the Australian. And whatever one thinks of Mr. Bant, he's not exactly indicted by the ICC. So this raises a question. What exactly shall we agree is blood libel? How should we define it? It's clearly not just the specific allegation about the use of children's blood to enrich flour. Since we hear the term bandied about so often these days, shall we define it to mean any allegation against a Jewish person involving children? Such as, for example, when Michael Oren accused Bernie Sanders no less of blood libel. Or perhaps any allegation about Jews that is horrific, as Mr. Liebler seems to suggest in this op-ed. We can do that, but we're not sure such definitions are useful if we want to preserve the idea that blood libel is something uniquely awful. Whatever one thinks of the charge of genocide, it's a charge which has been made by serious people and has to be debated on the evidence, not simply dismissed on the basis of some tenuous link to an ancient superstition. In fact, at this point, I can't think of a single prominent progressive person, Jewish or otherwise, who has not been accused of blood libel by somebody. We at Neosis would like to propose a definition of blood libel that is best suited to the challenge of our era, and in fact best describes the essence of what blood libel has always been about. Blood libel is an amygdala hijacking allegation, which may or may not be true, but is spread without regard to evidence, leveled against a group whose guilt the public is predisposed to believe, that triggers a massacre. Let's put a pin in that for a moment, because we'll return to that definition at the end of this video. And also because there are other words we need to talk about.
Someone gets up and says something terrible about Israel. Terrible.
And what happens? The power goes out, the phone's cut off, the sky falls, we bring out the
very big stick.
Or do we deal with it in the marketplace of ideas, discussing the things we need to discuss in debate with rationality and reason, as the Greeks taught all our ancestors to do when they blessed us with civilization? You're welcome. Like, what does it mean to be indigenous? Does it mean your ancestors lived here 2,000 years ago? Does anyone know where the ancestors of the Mohawk Indians lived in the year 70? How about the people of the Kulin Nation? Does anyone have a clue if they lived in Victoria in the year 70? And if not, who did?
Delegitimizing the state itself, its right to exist.
What does that mean? Shouldn't we agree on that before leveling that accusation at people? From where do states get their legitimacy? Who gets to confer it, and who gets to take it away? I don't know what you think, but But in Western political theory, we believe that legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed. Those are the words in the U.S. Declaration of Independence, and you'll find analogs in the English Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Rights of Man, and many constitutional documents, because the idea goes all the way to John Locke. So, assuming we all believe in
fundamental values of the West,
can someone tell me how Mary Kostakidis or Antoinette Latouche or anybody can delegitimize Israel when the legitimacy of the Israeli state is something they can neither bestow nor take away? And there's more. So much more we have to talk about. What does it mean to use the word globalize the intifada?
The phrase of global intifada.
Global intifada.
Globalize the intifada.
When you normalize language like globalize
Intifada.
Intifada. Free Palestine. We hear that on the streets. We hear that on college campuses.
It has become a call for violence.
from the river to the sea.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is a very violent statement.
From the river to the sea!
It's a very violent statement.
Okay, so I was going to say now no one will hire me.
What does it mean to be Jewish after the destruction of Gaza?
No, this will be the new Judaism, and maybe the only Judaism.
And again, just as in America, how are we going to agree to disagree on political questions, like our appropriate relationships with other governments in that region, without turning on each other as well? This isn't going to be easy, but the good news is that it's not impossible. We can do this, but not until we stop getting triggered by each other, especially by the smallest of things, like slogans and flags.
I don't know about you guys, but whenever I see the Palestinian flag, I feel the exact same way as if I am seeing a Nazi flag.
Which raises another question that we in Australia need to talk about. What exactly is a safe space, a sanctuary, and who in Australia is entitled to have one?
You have to know that that's the goal.
No, that's not the goal. That can't be the goal if we want to build social cohesion. Truthfulness is not sufficient for social cohesion, and it's no guarantee of social cohesion, but it is a non-negotiable prerequisite to start working on it.
The targeting of a business because it happens to be owned by someone who happens to be Jewish is, in my view, anathema to what Australia represents. It's not who we are.
We agree, and we would add, labeling Australians as racist because they happen to be called that by someone who happens to know the editor of the newspaper or the CEO of the company or the premier or even the PM himself.
In my view, anathema to what Australia represents. It's not who we are.
We need to start doing better about speaking more truthfully and accurately about each other because we really do have serious disagreements to hammer out. If we think of social cohesion as the core of an onion, truthful discourse is the outermost skin. We have to get past that to even start working on the harder stuff, which, as we'll see in the subsequent videos of this series, are going to be truly hard. There are businesses in Australia that some Australians believe merit boycotting because of statements about the war in Gaza their owners have made. Some are owned by Jews, others are owned by Muslims, others by other people, but lazily labeling these boycotts anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or anything other than what they are is a facile way of avoiding the substantive debate about what people said and the reasons they said it. If you are one of the many Australians who boycotted Nomad, you're entitled to be criticized for that action on the basis of what you did and the reasons you did it. But you are also entitled not to be accused of boycotting it simply because the owner is Lebanese, especially by your Prime Minister. This kind of discourse sells Australians short and enables the white anting of our social fabric. We need better standards of discourse, as the story of two Australian women on both sides of this debate illustrates.
I try not to stand.
Deborah Conway has been a pillar of Melbourne's music and art scene for over 45 years, and in December of 23 gave an interview that plunged her into the heart of the debate over Israel and Gaza. Her treatment was described by Sky News in their landmark documentary on antisemitism in Australia as one example of what antisemitism looks like.
Not only were Deborah and Willie doxxed, They were also cancelled.
They were cancelled, but not, as suggested by Mr. Frydenberg, for being Jewish. Ms. Conway's religion has been known to Australians since her debut in 1979. She wasn't outed in December 23. Ms. Conway gave an interview with Patricia Karvelas and was asked about artists wearing keffiyehs after the performance of Chekhov's The Seagull at the Sydney Theatre Company, which you may recall caused a minor scandal back in November 23.
Should you be able to protest about something that you feel passionately about? And is that something that you can hijack another work of art over?
Now, leaving aside the irony that The Seagull may in fact be the perfect event for a quiet demonstration of artistic rebellion against a seen but unspoken, unjust, or even horrific reality, which some might say is what the play is all about, what got Ms. Conway in trouble with social media was her use of the word hijack. Because to people who are old enough, hijacking, keffiyehs, and the PLO are all indelibly linked in our memory. So the verdict for many people was that Ms. Conway used that word as a sly Islamophobic insult. If these were written remarks, a good editor might strike the word hijacking. But no reasonable person listening to Ms. Conway could say she meant anything other than what she literally said. Unfortunately, social media being social media, the remark went viral, and what is worse, it did not stop there. When asked about the death of children in Gaza, she prefaced her remarks with these unfortunate words.
But kids, lots of kids. I mean, we know they're not Hamas, right?
Well, it depends on what you call kids.
Now, let's be clear. She went on to explain that in her mind, a 16-year-old with an assault rifle was not just a kid, but also a combatant, which is fair enough. Most Australians would probably agree. But on social media, the statement
depends on what you call kids.
Taken out of context can mean all sorts of things. Is Deborah Conway suggesting Palestinians aren't kids?
Well, it depends on what you call kids.
As she was preparing for an interview,
on the day of the interview, I was told via the publicist that the producer had just arrived back from overseas, and I was too hot property, too controversial to have on a light entertainment show.
Ms. Conway understandably didn't find that acceptable.
Deborah Conway went to the press, and the interview eventually took place.
Deborah Conway did say some controversial things about Gaza which are worthy of criticism, and as a public figure, she should not be above it. But like all of us, has the right to be criticized for what she said, not for what she didn't say. The reason it's important to be precise about what happened to Deborah Conway, that she was canceled not for being Jewish, but because her words were taken out of context and misrepresented, is that had Mr. Frydenberg and the team been forced to do that, they might have been more sensitive to the irony of what they were about to do in that very same program to another Australian woman, Newtown MP Jenny Leong.
She stood on
the Jewish lobby and the Zionist lobby are infiltrating into every single aspect of what is ethnic community groups. They rock up.
Here's New South Wales Greens MP Jenny Leong.
Their tentacles reach in to the areas that try and influence power. And I think that we need to call that out and expose it.
Just as with Ms. Conway, obviously this is an unfortunate choice of words. Were they written remarks? An editor would change them. We all know it's out of date to call pro-Israel lobby organizations the Jewish lobby, although we also know many Jewish supporters of Israel who simultaneously insist that Jews who don't support Israel are an ignorable fringe. And of course, one shouldn't use the word tentacles in a conversation about the influence of such organizations. We get it. But just as reasonable people can apply common sense when listening to Ms. Conway's use of the word hijacking, reasonable people can apply common sense and understand that tentacles in this context, which was a free-form remark in a panel discussion, is simply a synonym for influence and reach. The very influence and reach that members of said organizations do not deny having achieved.
If we have influence in certain segments of society, whether it be business, the arts, the legal community, academia, it is because that influence has been earned through our blood and through our toil.
Fair enough.
And it is time, I believe, to exert that influence.
Also fair enough.
Across all sectors where Jews have influence, we need to bring that influence to bear.
Again, fair enough. Nobody's begrudging. But if it is anti-Semitic to even talk about it and what it means, well,
it's not like with the Nuremberg Protocols. It's talking about how a lobbying organization uses money.
Perhaps somebody should have informed former Age editor Michael Goenda before he went off and wrote a whole book about the subject.
We're not getting pushed around anymore.
Isn't that awkward? But Mr. Frydenberg and his team were in no mood for giving Ms. Leong the benefit of any doubt.
Tentacles. It's a despicable anti-Semitic slur that evokes memories of the Nazi era.
The thing is, there's something about this cartoon we suspect Mr. Frydenberg does not know, but which we think adds interesting color to the whole story about what happened to Jenny Leong. Because this cartoon is from 1941 and appeared in the German satirical magazine Die Brennnessel, whose cartoonist, an Austrian by the name of Josef Planck, was not targeting Jews or Jewry. The cartoon is about the British Empire, whose figurative tentacles are wrapped around the globe in search of oil, which you can see there as a black blob, positioned with surprising geological accuracy. The head of the octopus is Mr. Planck's attempt at Winston Churchill, which you probably recognize now that I've pointed it out to you. And the Star of David over Churchill's head is there because that's how Nazis often portrayed Churchill, with a Star of David halo, because of the standard German propaganda trope about Churchill being backed by globalist Jewish financial interests. So of course it's an anti-Semitic cartoon, because Planck, as a Nazi, was an anti-Semite. But the target of the cartoon was Winston Churchill and the British Empire, not Jews. And those tentacles are the tentacles of the British Empire. So the question for us is, why was an obscure cartoon locked away in the archives of the Library of Congress on people's minds in 2024? Where did it come from? Why this cartoon? Perhaps, and we emphasize perhaps because we can't know, but perhaps it's because this is the cartoon pro-Israel commentator Eve Barlow used to accuse Greta Thunberg of also making a Nazi reference. In her case, by placing a stuffed octopus on her knee in this photo expressing support for the people of Gaza and Palestine. To our knowledge, neither Ms. Barlow nor anyone else has ever produced any evidence supporting the allegation that said octopus toy was anything other than what Ms. Thunberg said it was. A stress relief toy for autistic people. Did Ms. Barlow care?
They don't care about whether it's true or not.
You have to know that that's the goal.
Find a way of delegitimizing and censoring people.
Does she care now? We can't know. But if Ms. Barlow's goal was to cause distress for Ms. Thunberg, she succeeded. Ms. Thunberg took down her post and spent months denying the allegation, which would not go away.
If it serves the cause, it's true.
Because you don't have good argument.
You cannot allow them into a big tent.
If you've noticed not hearing much from her since October 23, maybe it's because Greta Thunberg, once a darling of the left and its media, is now well and truly out of the tent.
I know that mentality.
The move is always to basically to turn attention away from what's actually happening.
Turn the subject to the accusers, not to the accused.
And turn it into a question about the motivations of the person who is making the criticism.
All we know is that whatever one thinks of Ms. Thunberg, of her politics, of her tactics, nobody deserves to be slandered the way she was. What's more important, Ms. Barlow could not have done it alone. The reason the attack landed, the reason it was so distressing for Ms. Thunberg, is that reporters and others kept asking her about it. It is they who made the charge impossible to ignore. Otherwise, it would have just been another baseless claim on the internet. It was weaponized because of the complicity of a whole lot of people who we think should have known better. We wonder whether Guardian reporter Tamsin Rose should also have known better. She described Ms. Leong as, quote, referencing an anti-Semitic cartoon, unquote, when it is self-evident that she did not reference said cartoon. Mr. Frydenberg did.
Tentacles. It's a despicable anti-Semitic slur that evokes memories of the Nazi era.
In another article, Ms. Rose says the cartoon, quote, depicted Jews as an octopus, unquote. Which is ironic now that we all know the cartoon does not depict Jews as an octopus. Ms. Rose thought it depicted Jews as an octopus, because Josh Frydenberg thought it depicted Jews as an octopus. Why? Possibly for no other reason than that Eve Barlow did when she used it to hurl a cruel charge at a young autistic woman.
If it serves the cause, even if it's not true, it's true.
Push them, teach them how to defend by attacking.
All this would be comic if the effects on real people, real Australians, were not so hurtful. But Jenny Leong is not Deborah Conway. She did not go to the press because there was no friendly press to go to. In Australia, it's The Guardian that's supposed to be there to give people like Jenny Leong a fair go.
I have absolutely no illusions in The Guardian. None whatsoever.
There's no positive profiles of Jenny Leong. The Prime Minister hasn't extended her any human courtesy. She's not in any photos striking an indomitable pose. She's not defiantly proclaiming her refusal to shut up. Unlike Deborah Conway, Jenny Leong cannot take for granted her right to be treated fairly, but she should. Everyone has that right in Australia, or they need to if we're going to make any progress towards social cohesion. And let me be clear, both these women have views which are controversial, objectionable to many Australians, and are absolutely worthy of scrutiny and critique. They are public figures. They're both fair game. But people should be scrutinized for what they say, not what they didn't say. Deborah Conway has that right. Jenny Leong has that right also.
I certainly think social cohesion is on the ballot paper.
If it was, the voters of Newtown spoke, delivering a 10% first preferences swing towards Ms. Leong, more than doubling her margin to over 24%. Let that sink in. Perhaps the most high-profile Jewish Australian leader since Monash, a man who many people I know have been saying for years is PM material, and very well still could become Australia's first Jewish Prime Minister, a man of such caliber has publicly accused an Australian politician of what would have to be, if true, the single most offensive thing any Australian politician has done in modern memory. More extreme than anything even our most self-described right-wing politicians have said or done. And after a media frenzy that was presumably distressing for Ms. Leong personally, voters in one of the most progressive divisions in Australia voted for her anyway. How should we interpret this development? If we presume that the voters of Newtown, which for anyone outside Australia is like our version of Haight-Ashbury, or Berkeley, or the south side of Austin, let's presume that voters in that community did not just vote for someone they believe might be a secret Nazi. What then? Would we not have to conclude that they said to Mr. Frydenberg, "We don't believe you," about a serious charge of antisemitism? What a terrible foundation upon which to confront antisemitism at a time like this.
Turn the subject to the accusers, not to the accused.
As we've said, that's not going to work anymore.
You have to know that that's the goal. You have to expose these people. You cannot allow them into a big tent.
She's specifically talking about anti-Zionist Jews right there. But the fact is, they're already in the tent. Gaza has done that. It has brought hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people around the world into that tent, and they are talking about these things. Nobody controls access to the tent anymore. There are too many ways in. Each of us can only decide whether or not we choose to participate. And to Professor Weiss's dismay, many Jews are participating.
When you come on my program, Anthony, it always seems like that you, these views do seem to be in a very small minority.
The fact that right now Zionism amongst Western Jews is the majority ideology, so what? That's a temporary phenomenon.
People I talked to who told me that these things weren't true are now telling me that they are. And that definitely undermined a narrative that I had. And now I'm going to have to rethink a lot of things.
Friends, I've been thinking about Moses and his rage when he came down from the mount to find the Israelites worshipping a golden calf.
That 2,000 years ago, when the Romans destroyed the temple, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asks Vespasian for a favor.
Within the Jewish community, there's been a striking change.
It is a lesson about false idols.
Ben Zakkai and his colleagues, they completely changed the meaning of Judaism.
Jewish tradition does not think in terms of states having rights to exist. It thinks in terms of human beings having rights to exist.
The major turning point for me was when I realized that the IDF was not fighting this war in order to defeat Hamas.
And for 2,000 years, this is what they do. We learn.
What you're saying to me today does seem to be in the vast minority of things.
It's inverted. So the lives of the children of Gaza and the other people of Gaza are considered not to be precious, but the right of the existence of Israel as a Jewish state with a certain political system is considered sacrosanct. And to me, that's idolatry.
What did they learn in 2,000 years? What the hell did they learn?
And that false idol is called Zionism.
The joy of crushing weaker people under our feet.
I think Zionism will be looked upon by Jewish history as one of the greatest disasters in Jewish history.
The Romans knew them 2,000 years ago.
I don't know what the phrase right to exist means.
You could have just asked Vespasian. Tell me.
When we talk about we're losing the kids, we lost them.
He's a poison. He's a disgusting, self-hating Jew. He is something you find under a rock. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome political scientist Norman Finkelstein. Big clap. Let's get a clap.
We do not say, let our people go. We say, we have already gone, and your kids, they're with us now.
We wanted you to be Zionists. We did not intend that our emphasis on tikkun olam, social repair, would lead some Jews to join anti-Israel demonstrations. We did not intend for American Jews to lead Passover Seders in so-called liberated zones.
Now that's a family argument. We at Naosis have no desire to butt into anyone else's family debates.
A lot easier to be a Jew who's critical of Israel in the United States than it is in Australia, in Canada.
But still, the Jewish community, like all of us in the West, is engaged in a bitter debate about Israel, Gaza, and this war. However, unlike for non-Jews, that debate is intensified by the historically resonant and poignant question of the meaning of Israel, the meaning of Zionism, and its relationship to Jewish history, community, and identity. There's nothing unique or new about that. That happens with all communities from time to time. And when the issues at stake go to the very heart of identity, the debates can be vicious and ugly. The reason is that we Homo sapiens are hardwired to despise apostasy.
What is the penalty for apostasy? It's an Islamic country, then the Sharia is very clear. Apostasy is dealt with the death penalty. Thank you, that's all I want.
No, not that kind of apostasy. It turns out apostasy has nothing to do with religion, although if you practice an Abrahamic faith, that's the context in which you understand that word, thanks to these little words in Deuteronomy. But apostasy is a Greek word. It simply means to stand apart. It's not really a crime against God or church. It's a crime against tribe. And we tribal apes are programmed to despise crimes against tribe. Consider the most gruesome things we humans have done to each other over the ages. Burnings, impalement, crucifixion. To whom do we do them? Not to our enemies. We do that to those who betray tribe. Always. It's not cerebral. Don't try and reason it out. It's primal. That means family fights are primal. Whether arguments about child custody, dividing up the inheritance, whether to put icons in churches, or the meaning of Zionism and Jewish identity. If you're Christian watching this and getting smug about the fact that we don't burn people at the stake anymore, ask yourself if you'd ever consider barracking for a different footy team because, well, maybe your team just isn't winning. Exactly.
It's un-Australian!
Nothing to do with Australia. It's primal. It's human nature. As we recognize that this debate is and will continue to be especially poignant for our Jewish friends, we, the 99.5% of Australians who are Gentiles, should give Jews the space to have it without butting in. Last year, Professor Marsha Langton made waves when, like many establishment leaders in the First Nations community, she expressed the view that those inside the community who opposed the voice were essentially what Americans would call Uncle Toms.
Now these comments resurfaced from 2018 in the Saturday paper, where she was speaking about Jacinta Price and her mother Bess, who was a prominent Northern Territory politician.
Which did not impress News Corp.
It's pretty shocking, but not unexpected.
Yet imagine how they'd felt if Professor Langton wasn't even a member of the community. Imagine calling someone an Uncle Tom if you're white, or accusing a trans person of being anti-trans when you yourself aren't trans.
Take a good look, kids. This is what happens when you eat your Wheaties every morning.
You might find that joke funny, you might find it tasteless, but can you imagine some white bloke deciding to tone police Ms. Jenner?
I didn't cut it off, I just retired it.
Imagine Andrew Bolt taking the time to publish a column in The Australian condemning Ms. Jenner for her anti-trans hate, claiming to have been offended on behalf of the trans community. The very idea is a punchline. Yet this is what many non-Jews did in the pages of papers like The Australian, including Professor Langton herself, who wrote this exact column accusing a young Jewish woman of being anti-Semitic. The reason was a comedy sketch by Sarah Schwartz, which had very little to do with Jews and was all about Peter Dutton.
I will not stop speaking about how Peter Dutton and the coalition are misusing and exploiting the rise in anti-Semitism, because I think that that is something that is fueling division and racism and anti-Semitism towards Jewish people.
What's worse, the characterization of Ms. Schwartz's comments were so divorced from the substance of her sketch, which anyone can watch online, by the way, that we suspect few people actually watched it. Instead, Ms. Schwartz was subjected to a torrent of abuse from non-Jewish Australians who had the chutzpah to tell a Jewish woman how to be Jewish, probably because they reacted to this single slide, taken out of context and characterized in a way that, well, you can decide for yourself if you watch the video. But what is unique about this debate right now for the Jewish community is the degree to which non-Jews, that's 99.6% of Australians, feel entitled to participate.
You called yourself loathing Jew, which I didn't know is something that Gentiles could throw around.
What do you mean self-hating Jew?
You are a Jew who is anti-Israel.
In the Senate of Australia, 2 Jewish women gave testimony to a Senate hearing on anti-Semitism and were treated to questions like this.
Why do you call yourselves the Jewish Council of Australia? I'll put it to you again. Don't refer to a single example in your submission.
Scar,
not a single
Senator
one.
Scar, I am going to conduct this inquiry and this hearing in a respectful way, given that the content we are talking about is ensuring the respect of students on campus. We're going to extend that respect to our witnesses. No, Senator.
I'm entitled to interrupt if the question's not been answered.
No,
Chair.
well, Senator Henderson, the witness is entitled to answer the question,
Yes.
and she's doing that.
Yes, I'm entitled to.
They're not one-word answers.
Thank you very much.
It was all like that. You'd think they were hostile witnesses at a corruption hearing.
I think that sums up this sort of organisation you are.
In the Senate of Australia, the chair of the committee hearing a bill on anti-Semitism had to remind 2 Australian senators of the need to show respect to 2 Jewish Australian women who were simply there to offer testimony on their response to a request from the Senate.
I'm not sure that this is entirely relevant to this inquiry.
And we've got to say, we think Ms. Schwartz was far more patient and polite than many people we know might have been in that same situation.
Has that been a regular problem, being Jewish and being told that unless you are supportive of the state of Israel, which is obviously a foreign country, that you are anti-Semitic?
The way that we talk about anti-Semitism isn't about protecting Jews, it's about protecting Israel. How dangerous is that?
The only Jewish safety that's important is Zionist Jewish safety. So if you're an anti-Zionist Jew, you can get thrown to the ground. That literally happened to a professor in her 50s or 60s, I believe at University of Vermont, who was I think in the Department of Jewish Studies.
And as we've already said in 2 separate videos already, you can even have a brick thrown at your face, which bloodies it so much you wet yourself, and have a grown man, a fellow Jewish man, expert on radicalism no less, think it would be funny to make a public joke about it. When concern for Jewish safety and respect stops at friends and the people they care about, it's not concern for Jewish people. It's just self-interest.
Even if there was 2 Jews in Australia who opposed what was going on.
That's what's so strange about this family fight. The degree to which Gentiles feel entitled to participate. Education Minister Peter Clare declined the New South Wales Board of Deputies' call to condemn Ms. Schwartz. But he did something close enough. He told the Australian that Queensland University of Technology should enforce its policies. Now that's obviously true and anodyne. It's still disappointing because any competent politician would know this quote would be used to validate a charge that the minister clearly declined to make explicitly, which is exactly how it was used, to add the gravitas of a ministerial statement to the allegation, easily refuted by anyone who watched the video, that Ms. Schwartz hates herself and her tribe. It's always difficult to be an apostate, but it's especially difficult when the apostasy is over questions of great moral weight, as they are, of course, at this moment. When we think about what this tiny minority of Jewish Australians has endured to stand up for principle, and the cost in terms of a connection to personal family and community, there really is no excuse for someone outside this community to be complicit in their mistreatment simply to preserve a professional or business relationship, or even a personal friendship.
In Jewish tradition, there's a wonderful dynamic. There are truth tellers who say to the rulers and the people, what you're doing is wrong. Those people are called the prophets.
Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam, salam, salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam.
In summary, for non-Jews, all this means 2 things. First, we should stay out of family fights, obviously. Second, and just as important, we are crazy if we think we're going to build cohesion in Australia by institutionalizing a definition of anti-Semitism that defines so many Australians, Jews and non-Jews alike, as enemies in the struggle against anti-Semitism at the very moment when that definition of anti-Semitism is one that Jewish leaders like Rabbi Hirsch and Abe Foxman say they can't make their own children believe.
It is incredibly powerful to see so many young people waking up, asking questions, young and old people.
The amazing thing is that it has long been an anti-Semitic trope to conflate Israel with Jews and to say if you oppose Israel, it means you're anti-Semitic, or all Jews have loyalty to Israel. And now this conflation has become the foundation for applying this anti-Semitism label to the protest movement.
We're crazy to do this. What we really need is to create the language and norms and frameworks for us to debate the questions that need debating, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. We need to do that now because it's not going to get easier in the future. And one way to start is by all of us making a better effort to be genuine and sincere.
Do you believe that the protest movement in a whole is doing that, is attacking the community, or do you understand the concerns of some of those protesters who've been...
I certainly understand people's concerns and also their right to protest, but I think it's morphed into something that's much more sinister.
Anti-Israel sentiment we've seen on the streets, which is becoming very quickly anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish as well.
The protests have morphed. How have they morphed? When did this happen? What protests has Mr. Sharma ever observed? What protests has anyone in Mr. Sharma's bubble ever observed? What were the protests like before this morphing? And most importantly, why didn't Ms. Siegel, Senator Sharma, or anyone else saying that the protests have morphed, why didn't they speak up before this morphing and object to the way the protests were characterized then? As we said, this is a conversation that is moving ahead with or without any of us. So those of us who want to contribute constructively need to show more curiosity about fellow Australians. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how successful you are, or even how august you are. There is no substitute for curiosity, for asking sincere questions, and for finding things out. Without it, even the best and brightest among us can't help sometimes sounding like this.
Look at the Jewish protests and look at the Palestinian protests.
When you look at the Jewish protests, you will see what's taking place. They're praying for the release of the captives. They're singing, they are praying for peace. Now look at the pro-Palestinian rallies.
Yitgadal, Yitgadal, Shemei Rabbah. May the great name.
And what do the Palestinians do? Whether it's 9/11 or 7th of October, they hand out lollies and they celebrate when people are hacked to death.
It's freedom and it's safety. All the kids all around the world.
So why are you here today?
I mean, obviously we all know there's an occupation going on.
I don't know. But that happens to be a fact. It's a reality.
I've never felt unsafe at these rallies, and I stand in solidarity with them that occupation is not a Jewish value.
All forms of racism are interconnected.
The lids have been blown off the sewers by the anti-Zionists. So keep
I don't want to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, but
they're the same. They're two hues of the same color.
The Jewish Council is deeply concerned about rises in anti-Semitism in Australia. We consider that the only way for us to effectively fight anti-Semitism is by working in partnership with other groups also facing bigotry and discrimination.
It's been incredibly disappointing to see some groups, politicise this moment and straight away start blaming other racialised groups.
It is incredibly powerful to see so many young people waking up, asking questions, young and old people.
It was Assange who said, never let anyone tell you who your enemy is. Don't let them tell you that people who are protesting a genocide are your enemy.
Andrew Cuomo went into a synagogue in this race and called me and Zoran and the black speaker of the city council anti-Semitic.
They don't give a shit. Fairly highly educated class of Jewish city dwellers, and most of them rent.
You have people that are in control of large groups of people that convince these people that these other large groups of people that they don't even know are their enemies.
There's a class divide among Jews.
The enemies are the ones who are telling you that the students protesting for peace, protesting against the genocide,
they are happy to use us as pawns for their own political purposes.
Why do you call yourselves the Jewish Council of Australia?
The only Jewish safety that's important is Zionist Jewish safety.
You're emotionally damaged. Jewishly.
The ones telling you that these people are your enemy are the real enemies.
Don't for it.
We've got people in our country who hate our country. Thank you.
Freedom. Freedom. Freedom.